Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 685 for March 18th, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
It's a real Willy Wonka's factory, it really is. It's great fun. So I can't wait for you to come and play, because that's what it feels like. It feels like we're playing, that this can't really be real. Because it's, the permutations and possibilities are endless.
Back in December of 2015, I was in Waterford, Ireland for the first still run at Mark Reynier's new Waterford Distillery. On this St. Patrick's Day weekend, we'll catch up with the progress at Waterford as its spirit gets closer to that magical 3-year-old mark and can legally be called whiskey, even though Reynier plans to wait at least a couple of more years before the first bottling of Waterford single malt. In the meantime, Waterford is trying things never before done in Irish whiskey, things like keeping each farm's barley separated from field to barrel, and just this month experimenting with biodynamically-grown barley. What is biodynamics? It's popular among winemakers, but has only been tried once before in whiskey, when Mark Reynier ran Bruichladdich Distillery on Islay. I'll explain it to us, and a whole lot more, on this week's WhiskyCast In Depth. I'll also talk with Sabine Sheehan of Lambay Whiskey, one of the newest entrants into the booming Irish whiskey market. I'll also have the calendar of events, this week's Your Voice, and the What I'm Tasting This Week department, all coming up on this week's WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
You don't need a special occasion to celebrate with something truly unique, but a personally engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label can make any occasion special. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnnywalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And we must start the week off on a sad note. Irish police and the Health and Safety Authority are investigating a fatal accident last Monday at the Irish Distillers maturation warehouses in Dungourney, about 9 kilometers away from Midleton Distillery. Dominic Hughes, a warehouseman at the site, was killed in an accident involving a forklift. Specific details have not been released because of the ongoing investigation. Hughes leaves behind a wife and stepson. Irish Distillers Chairman and CEO Jean-Christophe Coutures issued a statement expressing the company's sorrow and pledging to both help Hughes' family and cooperate with the investigation. He also ordered the cancellation of all Irish Distillers promotional events this week leading up to St. Patrick's Day, including an event scheduled in Dublin for Thursday night to unveil a new Jameson expression. We also extend our condolences to the Hughes family and all of our friends at Irish Distillers. We have received a number of messages from listeners asking if there's a fund they can contribute to help the Hughes family. We'll pass along details on that as they become available. Meanwhile, the trade dispute between the United States and the European Union had an Irish flair this Thursday. Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar was in Washington for the traditional St. Patrick's Day visit of Ireland's Prime Minister to the White House and Capitol Hill. During a private meeting with President Donald Trump, he suggested that the issues over steel and aluminum imports could be resolved as part of a new trade agreement between the U.S. and the European Union. The Trump administration's punitive tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum are scheduled to go into effect this week and are expected to be followed quickly by retaliatory moves from Europe targeting bourbon and other U.S.-made products. Before heading to Washington, Varadkar told reporters at the South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas, that he's worried a trade war could lead to U.S. tariffs against Irish whiskey. Of course, the U.S. is the single largest market for Irish whiskey, with nearly $900 million worth of exports to the U.S. last year. If or when the European Union retaliates with tariffs on bourbon, Jim Beam could be one of the hardest hit brands as the largest exporter of bourbon to global markets. That was not on the minds, though, of the folks in Claremont, Kentucky Monday when they filled the 15 millionth barrel of bourbon distilled at the Jim Beam distilleries in Kentucky. Instead, they were celebrating, and Jim Beam's Fred Noe was the happiest guy in the place.
Oh, it was an exciting time. Big thing, doing it with my son Freddie. It makes it even more special, the next generation of Beams, working with him, watching him come into his own here, and, getting that milestone of 15 million. It was kind of funny that it took them 30 years after Prohibition to get to 1 million, and now we're just in about 2 years doing 1 million barrels. So it just kind of shows you the demand for bourbon has grown considerably since Prohibition was repealed, which just kind of shows what we're doing. We're doing something right for sure.
So who actually got to drive it in for the final hit, you or Freddie?
Freddie actually put the final hit on it. Make sure that his dad got it in deep enough. I'm getting old and weak. Get a young, strong boy to make sure the bung's in there good and deep so we don't have a lot of angel share out of that one.
Well, Booker's got to get something out of that.
He'll get his share. Don't worry about that. We're probably losing 6 or 8% now that he's up there with the Angels. Used to be 4, but I'm sure we're losing more now that he's up there with them. Because I know he's getting his share, that's for sure.
What's going to happen with that 15 millionth barrel? Is that one that'll get used eventually, or is that a milestone that you guys never touch again, or what?
Oh, we'll sure open it up and bottle it and probably use the bottles for a charity or something, going for good to give back to the community somehow, some way. That's kind of what we've been looking to do with some of the other ones. We haven't quite figured it out yet, but we've got some other milestone barrels that are aging that we're trying to figure out a way to hook it back to a charity of some kind.
Hey, let's talk about that new batch of Bookers honoring Kathleen DiBenedetto.
Oh, that was a great honor for me to honor her. I mean, Kathleen, as you know, was the brand manager of small batch bourbons back when they were babies. She always used to call them her babies when the brands were brand new. And she worked diligently to promote those brands, the Bookers, the Knob Creek, the Basil Hayden and Bakers, and grew them into, the super premium line they were. And we've been looking to name batches for folks who are connected to the stuff, and I couldn't think of a more worthy recipient of that honor than Kathleen. I mean, she is a member of the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame, and she did work very hard to promote those brands and still works very hard promoting our products to folks around the country.
I know you sort of thought of her as a kid sister when she was
she
working
was.
with her dad, right?
She was probably the daughter Booker never had. She wanted to learn about bourbon. She came here and physically worked every job from unloading the grain to the finished product. And every evening she would come to my mom and dad's house and have dinner, and Booker would test her on what portion of the jobs she did that day and to see if she acquired the knowledge that he thought she should have acquired. And if she didn't have the right answers, he proceeded to get on her pretty hard to drive home the point. You should have learned this. You should have learned that. If you want to really learn, you've got to learn this stuff. And he made her cry a few times, but in the end, it was all just because he loved her so much, and she wanted to learn. He wanted to make sure she learned it right, and that's kind of how that story went. It was good. I can remember those days.
Well, he didn't treat her any differently than he treated you. I know he probably made you cry a few times too, right?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't much difference. Like I say, she was just like a sister, I would say, because, I mean, he was as hard on her as he was me, because he wanted to make sure that if she learned it right and knew what she was supposed to know, which it was good. It was a good experience for her, and she wouldn't take anything for it. At the time, she probably wondered why she subjected herself to such abuse, but that was Dad's way of teaching. He wasn't easy on the people he liked. If he liked you, he was hard on you. If he didn't really know you, then he was always just a big teddy bear.
Let's put that 15 million barrels number into perspective now. It includes all of the bourbon distilled at the Jim Beam Distillery in Claremont and the Booker No Distillery nearby in Boston, Kentucky. Heaven Hill is the only other Kentucky distiller that releases lifetime production numbers. Their team filled the 7 millionth barrel in early 2015, and they should be pretty close to that 8 million mark by now. On that note, Heaven Hill is out with this year's first batch of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. It carries the batch code A118 on the front label, and it's bottled at 65.3% ABV. Luxco is releasing the fourth bourbon in its annual Blood Oath series. As with the previous three, Pact number 4 is a one-time only bottling blended by John Rempe from 9, 10, and 12-year-old bourbons, with the 9-year-old being finished in toasted barrels. It's bottled at 49.3% ABV and will sell for $99.99 a bottle. And by the way, Luxco has also announced that the grand opening for its new Lux Row Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky, will be on April 11th, with the Visitors Center to be open to the public after that. And Kansas City's J. Rieger & Company has released the second annual edition of its Monogram whiskey. As with last year's inaugural release, the Solera blended corn and rye whiskeys are finished for up to 30 months in century-old sherry botas from the legendary Williams and Humbert Sherry Bodega in Spain. You can hear more about that process in my interview with Andy Rieger from last April. You'll find it in the archives at whiskycast.com. Just 1,200 bottles of the 2018 edition will be available at a recommended retail price of $99.99 each. Turning now to Scotch whiskies, Ardbeg officially unveiled its annual limited edition this week with the committee release of Grooves. As Dr. Bill Lumsden hinted in our interview last month, it's made with heavily charred casks that created grooves and cracks to get more whiskey into contact with the wood. Grooves is bottled at 51.3% ABV for the committee edition, and while it will be limited to Ardbeg committee members in Europe, it is on sale at select retailers in the U.S. for around $120 a bottle. However, the online sales to committee members through Ardbeg's website have been delayed after Demand Wednesday crashed the servers. Glenmorangie Company executives hope to have the site's e-commerce system back in service this coming week. Douglas Lang & Company has created a new series for its Provenance range of single-cask Scotch whiskies. The Coastal Collection will highlight whiskies from Scotland's island distilleries, with the first release, a 10-year-old Bunnahabhain, matured in a refill hogshead cask and bottled at 48% ABV. It'll be followed by 3 more quarterly releases over the next year. And the Glasgow Distillery Company is planning to release its first single malt later this year. The 1770 Glasgow Single Malt Scotch Whiskey has been maturing in first fill ex-bourbon barrels and is being finished right now in virgin oak casks. The distillery will have 5,000 bottles available for purchase through its website with an online ballot that ends in June. The price tag, £100 each for a 50 cl bottle. But those bottles will not be delivered until November. Finally, out of Australia, there's word that Australian Whiskey Holdings is making a bid to take over control of Lark Distillery. The company already owns about 48% of Lark's outstanding shares and is offering to buy the rest from shareholders for either stock or cash. If the stockholders all chose to take the money and run, the purchase price would be around 10.7 million Australian dollars. That's about 8.3 million US dollars at current exchange rates. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul and an ear for music. Here's a tweet we got from a listener the other day. Thanks for the heads up on Highland Park's playlist on Spotify. It was an awesome playlist to listen to during Scotch and Poker night with the guys last Saturday evening. Well, we can't guarantee you'll get a full house poker-wise, but open up some Highland Park and you're sure to get a full house full of friends. Visit highlandparkwhiskey.com to get the links to their Spotify playlists.
You don't need a special occasion to open a bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. But when you have a special occasion, why not celebrate with a specially engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label? Here's how one whiskey lover celebrated his team's recent success. He arranged to have 108 specially engraved bottles of Johnnie Walker Blue Label made for his co-workers. You might say he hit a home run. Just like a perfectly executed double play, Johnnie Walker Blue Label is smooth and well-rounded, and unlike a trophy, never needs polishing. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnniewalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
Johnnie Walker Blue Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Next time around, we'll be on location at the Wonderful World of Whiskey show in Cornwall, Ontario. And I'm looking forward to meeting plenty of WhiskyCast listeners at the NAV Center all weekend long. Last time around, I had said that this weekend's show would be coming from Dublin. Of course, with the fatal accident at Dungourney this week, as we mentioned in the news, those plans were changed, and justifiably so. Let's open up the inbox now for this week's Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. Got a tweet this weekend from @WhiskeyNeighbor in Edmonton, Alberta. Happy St. Patrick's Day, Mark. Since listening to your interview with Donald O'Gallagher from Glendalough Distillery, I have wanted to try something from their line. I finally found their double barrel in a local shop. Enjoyed it, Dram. Thanks for bringing me new experiences. Glad to help, neighbor. Now, as I said before, I'm going to be in Cornwall this coming weekend, but the inaugural Minnesota Spirits Fest is on Saturday night in Minneapolis, and the members of the local Women Who Whiskey chapter at WWW Twin Cities tweeted about the event the other night. I noted that it looks like a lot of fun and wished I could join them. Their response? What could you possibly be doing that is more important than this? Well, I'm already committed to being in Cornwall that night, but I also had to remind them that people from the Philadelphia area still aren't exactly welcome yet in Minneapolis after the Super Bowl. Their response? Well, that seems like a legit reason, but you are missing out on an amazing spirits scene, FYI. Okay, if you're in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, check it out. Last time around, we reported on the death of Dr. Pierce Lyons, the Irish-born founder of Kentucky-based Alltech and the founder of the Town Branch Distillery in Lexington and the Pierce Lyons Distillery inside the old St. James's Church in Dublin that opened up last year. I posted one of my photos of the whiskey altar at that distillery this week on our website and social media feeds as our whiskey photo of the week. And John Moriarty posted this note from Ireland on the WhiskyCast Facebook page. He will be missed most certainly. I had the great pleasure of meeting him and Deirdre when they stayed with us. He was kind and generous to me. I still have some of his whiskey which he gifted me on that occasion, now to be kept in his memory. What he and Deirdre did in restoring St. James's Church is truly amazing on so many levels. From respect to this holy place to distilling is quite out of this world. When in Dublin, it is a must visit. No arguments there, John, and thanks for your note. If there's something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Tumblr at WhiskyCast. This week's Your Voice is brought to you by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. I've already mentioned a couple of the events coming up this week, but it's a busy week all over the whiskey world. Whiskey Alive London is this coming Friday and Saturday. Whiskey Fest Chicago is on Friday night. Whiskies of the World San Francisco is on Saturday night. And the Whiskey Festival Noord-Nederland is in Groningen, the Netherlands, just to name a few. Louisville's Bourbon Women and the Bourbon Brotherhood are getting together for their annual She Sips, He Sips night, March 29th. The Scotch Whisky Experience in Edinburgh, Scotland, will have a Balblair and Speyburn tasting March 31st. The Nth Ultimate Whisky Experience is April 4th through the 7th in Las Vegas, and the Whiskey Obsession Festival is April 11th through the 14th in Sarasota, Florida. Right now, we have 190 different events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a festival or a tasting coming up, Just use the searchable calendar on our website and let us know all about it.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. In just a few minutes, we'll talk with Waterford Distillery founder Mark Reynier about the progress at his distillery, a little more than 2 years after his team turned a former Guinness brewery into a state-of-the-art whiskey distillery. But Waterford's whiskeys are still a couple of years away. Last August, we mentioned a new Irish whiskey joint venture between France's Camus family, which owns the Camus Cognac House, and Ireland's Baring family, which owns Lambay Island, just off the Irish coast near Dublin. This week, Lambay Irish Whiskey made its debut in the U.S. in New York City with a small batch blend and a single malt, both finished in Camus Cognac casks. Sabine Sheehan helped bring both whiskeys from concept to bottle.
I think Cyril Camus and Alex Baring, I suppose they share a common bond, love of nature. As I said, entrepreneurship and innovation, and they really wanted to come enter into the world of whiskey with this unique whiskey that they're bringing with a cognac cask finish. So this collaboration is what Lambay Irish Whiskey Company is all about.
And a love of good drink, too.
Absolutely, but it's got to be quality, right? So, yeah. So for us, it's taking the Maître d'Échelle, Patrick Leger, who's our master blender, and bringing those 5 generations of Camus expertise into our whiskey. And then, of course, the art of triple distillation and the art of fine whiskey making is also part of our components of our whiskey. The Barings themselves live very quietly on this island, and Alex Baring is one of the directors in our company and has started to really love his whiskey lately, yeah.
The whiskies are made at West Cork, but they're really a product of the Lambay Island itself, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. I mean, yes, we buy our spirit in bulk, and then we use our processes of maturation and blending. And also we have a bonded warehouse on the island called the Sea Cask Room, where we mature our whiskey. And we use those influences on Lambay as it's a very unique ecosystem. It's got a very unique microclimate, and we feel that all of those environments of sea spray and iodine and salt influences the wood finish in our whiskey.
And the single malt is actually finished on Lambay Island, right?
Yes, that's correct. So we would have small batches of casks that are maturing, that is the single malt. And what's quite nice about this is that we lay our stocks down in anticipation of what seasonal, I suppose, environmentals will affect the wood. Because, you know, as I said, the sea and winds in summer are quite different to those in winter. And I suppose in winter, the access to the island isn't that great either because of the tides and swells. So we tend to get more dramatic influence coming through in the winter, but yet in the summer then you've got these beautiful florals that are naturally on the island, and the plant life that grows there. So I think it's going to be quite interesting for the future to see how these cask finishes are going to evolve.
Now, Lambay Island is on the east coast of Ireland, just off of Dublin. We've heard a lot about the Wild Atlantic Way and the influences it has on the whiskies from Dingle and places like that. Tell me about the difference in climate and microclimates, really, between the west side and the east side.
Okay, well, we're kind of, I suppose, because we're on the east side, it's Ireland's ancient east, which would be very much synonymous with that type of tourism trail. So the difference being in the east side is you're not getting that crashing extremity of the Wild Atlantic Way, which lends itself also quite poetically to the whiskey that's made there at that side of the island. On the east side, where Lambay is particularly placed, it seems to be nestled quite comfortably within the Gulf Stream. So it's just passing up under the hook of the southeast of Ireland, creates a very unique maritime condition mission for the island. It's almost like it has its own private ecosystem. It's quite surreal when you're there. The wind is not like it would be on the mainland. The aromas that are coming through from the grasses and the pollens and the seaweed, it's quite unique. And it is relatively much calmer than the West, It's prone to tides, so we are quite tidal. We have to deal with the tides on a regular basis, but with that comes then, I suppose, the aspect that you tend to have a little bit of privacy, and you can cut the island off from too many people wanting to jump on a boat and just come over. Ultimately, that's not possible because it is a private island.
Let's talk about the whiskeys, because you have the single malt and the blend that are just now really starting to make their way out to the world, right?
That's correct. So we are just launching these whiskies this week in the US in partnership with CIL Amerique and O-Pee-Chee Distributors here in New York and New Jersey. And then, of course, Camus, having great placement in global travel retail, has opened us up in markets around the world through travel retail that we can tap into Asia, for example, which is a real priority for us. So whether it's in Taiwan, Seoul, Hong Kong, Paris, and, of course, Dubai, they were our starting travel retail destinations. It's been fantastic.
And you're available in Ireland too, though, right?
Yes, we're available in Ireland for the last 2 weeks. In Ireland, we're having a slightly different approach. We're taking very much a community approach with North County Dublin. So as Lambay Island is very much a North County Dublin community, we're starting off in key accounts around there. We want to invite them into our family. And then we would be in specialist whiskey stores and targeting some select hotels in Dublin city centre. So
this really comes at a time when Irish whiskey, we've talked about this many times, has this renaissance going on and really an explosion of interest in Irish whiskey worldwide, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's credible to be able to see the influence of all of these other great distillers and great distilling whiskey companies in Ireland. Not only that, we're experiencing phenomenal growth and expanding by 2020. It's upwards of 300 million. It's incredible. For us, as a new Irish whiskey in this category, it's challenging. Of course, we know that. We're small. We're a smaller batch crafted whiskey. But we feel that there's enough space in this market for us, particularly because we have this unique cask finish. So we're driving that unique selling point to the market.
And let's make it very clear, the Baring family has no intention of building a distillery on Lambay Island anytime soon, right?
No, that's not their intention, because of the fact that it is quite a very special place. We call it an odyssey of oddities. It's got an extraordinary amount of curiosity and tales to discover. And I suppose we want to keep that intact because it is a nature reserve after all. And there's a lot more species living on that island than there is humans. So we want to make sure that they continue to live in the right environment. Yes, sustainability is a key part of what we're doing. And we have to respect that is a fragile landscape on that island.
But there's also a really good water source on there too, isn't there? We haven't discussed that yet.
Yes, that's true. We've got a natural spring well resource there called the Trinity Well water that we're using in the finish of our whiskey. So we take this water from the island and use that then to craft the whiskey in the final finish, which adds, I think, a subtle smoothness to it as well in terms of taste.
The Lambay small batch will carry a recommended retail price of around $35 a bottle, while the single malt will sell for around $70 in the U.S. I'll have my tasting notes for both whiskeys later on. In December of 2015, I was in Waterford, Ireland for the very first still run at the new Waterford Distillery. That was Mark Reynier's return to the whiskey business after his departure from Bruichladdich. He assembled the investor group that revived Bruichladdich back in 2001, but was outvoted when his partners voted to sell the distillery to Remy Cointreau in 2012. Some of those investors joined him after that to form Renegade Spirits, which acquired the former Guinness Brewery in Waterford after Diageo closed it in 2013, and they turned it into a distillery. The company's name is a sign of its mission. At Bruichladdich, Mark Reynier clashed with the long-standing norms of Scotch whiskey, and he's doing the same thing now in Ireland by marching to the beat of his own drum. I spoke with him this week via Skype. So how are things going? It's been 2.5 years almost since I was out there for the first still run.
Well, yeah, it's been going very, very, very well indeed. We've got 2.33 million litres. It's a Rolls-Royce distillery. It's extremely well designed and built. by Diageo, and we converted it, as you know. So it's a real joy to run. It's what we've learned is all the amazing things that were installed when it was built in 2004. Lots of sort of measuring and monitors and so the information we get is it's unparalleled. We never had an idea at Bruichladdich what was happening in real time, but here you can see in real time what's going on. And of course, all those sensors were put in with a view to making something quicker and faster, whereas we're doing the opposite. We're making it slower to make it better. But of course, we can still use the same sensors to show us what's going on. So it's using technology that was there, but using it in a way that it wasn't really intended to be used. So that gives us a real-time picture of what's happening, which is riveting. So the distilling is going great. Our barley guys are really coming on, really well. We've got our 40 farms a year that we're distilling, 40 different terroirs. So each one with its own, or chosen specifically for its own identity. And we can really see that all the way through. Another one of the interesting things is we've got a mash filter, if you remember. And of course, that is almost like a terroir extractor. When you've got all these different terroirs coming through, I mean, it really is taking every last drop of that terroir out. So again, it was slightly unpredicted. It wasn't anticipated, but it's a virtue that we very much like. So we're building up this portfolio of component spirits, to see the difference that each terroir, each farm, produces a spirit with a different flavor profile. Some are more subtle, some are more similar. But they're all different, and we can demonstrate that both visually as well as technically. And as they mature away, we're having great fun going back to them to see how they've developed and the effect of maturation. And it's absolutely riveting. And of course, we have all this enormous volume of data to follow it. So it's a joy. And we've had great fun fiddling around with different farms, putting them together to see what happens and the different sort of flavor permutations. It's a real Willy Wonka's factory. It really is. It's great fun. So I can't wait for you to come and play, because that's what it feels like. It feels like we're playing, that this can't really be real. Because it's the permutations and possibilities are endless. So no, we're very, very pleased with the way it's going, and we distilled. We were able to get 3 of our farmers to grow some biodynamic barley, and that really is sort of the ultimate of terroir.
Now, you talked about, with the mash filter and with the technology, using that technology in a new way. Let's talk about the biodynamic stuff, which is the absence of all that technology, isn't it?
Well, you're right. It is the antithesis. I followed this from my wine days. So back in the sort of early 80s, early 90s was when I first came across it. And to be honest, I can remember the very first day in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And I went to see, as I did always, I went to see who was doing new things, who was when you're exploring, trying to find out, who's up to good things and who's worth following. And I'd heard about this domain and that they were doing good things. And so I got an invitation to go and turn up and visit. And so I met this chap, and he's put me in a waiting room, and he left me with a little sort of Reynier brochure And he said, look, read this and I'll be back to you. And I started flicking through this brochure, and it was all, it was just complete bollocks, complete and utter nonsense, astral this, stars that, And I thought, this guy is taking the piss. This guy is winding me up. This has to be a joke. This guy thinks this is all really funny, because this is nonsense, what this is in this brochure. And anyhow, after a while, I thought, well, what am I going to do? I'm obviously going to have to leave, because this guy is not serious. And eventually the guy put his head round the door, and he sort of rather sheepishly sort of said, have you read the brochure? And I thought, right, now I either tell him, thanks very much, but I'm not in for wasting my time, or you say, well, actually, yeah, but explain it to me. So it was either going to be a walkout, embarrassing disaster, or it was going to be, riveting. And I chose at the last minute or probably because I was too embarrassed and too English and too shy. But I said, yeah, I've read it, but I don't really understand it. And thank goodness I chose that option, because he then spent 2 or 3 hours showing me around his domain and explaining it to me. And I got the idea. And biodynamics, you have to get it, because otherwise on paper it just looks ridiculous. And I got it. And that was my introduction to biodynamics.
So explain what it is. Explain what you saw in this pamphlet that had you rolling your eyes.
Well, it's this guy. It stems from. See, this is the problem. A lot of biodynamic people won't go into the detail because it's too embarrassing and it's too difficult to explain, and others don't because they don't actually do it. They only do the little bits of it and they leave the rest of it. Because what it is, it stems from a 1924 series of lectures given by an Austrian philanthropist called Dr. Rudolf Steiner to some Swabian farmers who, after the First World War, were getting a bit worried about the drift away from the fields into the cities of agricultural workers. And they were worried that a lot of the idea, a lot of the know-how, a lot of what people just knew about farming, all that knowledge was being lost. And at the same time, the agrochemical industry that sort of developed out of World War I was steaming ahead, telling everyone to use lots and lots of pesticides, fertilizers, ammonias, nitrates. And they were worried that this was a retrograde step, and it wasn't a good news. This modernity, this idea was not good, and that we should go back to the ways of farming that were well known. So the concept is basically that a farm, if you go back 300 years or whatever, you couldn't just nip down to your local sort of farmer's market or B&Q and just buy whatever pesticide or insecticide you needed. You had to make do with what you had there on the farm. And if you take it even further, if you go back, this is like, since the last ice age, 15,000 years worth of farming know-how has been handed down, what works, what doesn't work. And the modern modern farming up to sort of the 1800s was the pinnacle of understanding, and risk being lost. So Steiner wrote it all down in a sort of guidebook, and called it biodynamics. And the core principle is that a farm has to be self-sufficient, because it always was. Fred Flintstone didn't nip down to Costco to buy stuff. They had to do with what was there, and so it's sort of a way of life. It's not something you just do. It's you have to run your whole farm or your whole estate according to that premise. And so the fertilizers and the soils, it's all about having a living soil, because of course you add all these years and years of insecticides and pesticides. You're basically neutering the soil, You're killing the soil, so that to the extent that eventually the soil only does whatever you put on it and nothing else. So biodynamics is very much about a living soil. The soil has to be living. It has to be nutritious. It has to be composted, manured. It has to be living. And then from that, everything else stems.
So to speak.
Yeah. So it's on the one hand incredibly simple, a concept, but on the other, it's also quite complicated. It's not something you just play at. You have to do it wholeheartedly. It means it's a lot more manual. It's a lot more suspicious of heavy modern machinery because that compacts soils and it squishes the air out of them. So it's very much a sort of going back to basics concept. Now you could argue, well, that all sounds all very tree-huggingly good and all very sweet, but the proof of the pudding is that you take any list of whoever's top 15 greatest winemakers in the world, and you'll find that 2/3 of them follow biodynamics. The likes of Romany Conti, Domaine Leroy, Zint-Humbrecht, Chateau Clemens, Chateau Yquem. There's a lot of followers, but not all of them make a song and dance about it. They keep it, sort of under their hat. And some of them follow it religiously. So you get the fundamentalists that do Steiner's book, absolutely to the core, which involves all the astral stuff as well. And then you get others who are more pragmatic, who adopt the basic themes, the basic tenets, but don't get involved in the full Monty. It's you've got different levels of interpretation. The funky stuff, the wacky stuff,
the cow horns.
Well, yeah. I mean, but again, you can see how that sort of came about. Cow horns. So there's eight preparations that biodynamics uses, and they're all to either, simple ones. For example, like you take, if you get aphids or mildew, whatever, a fungal infection. Mildew affects a lot of crops when it's wet and damp. But if you take horsetail and you treat it and put it in a tisane, sort of hot water, you spray that counters mildew. Now, it's not like mildew's a new problem. It's been going on forever. So, what did people do in the past? That's what they did. The cow horn preparations are basically producing very small volumes of hyper concentrated fertilizer. The cow horn is the receptacle. Obviously, it's calcium. You put sort of manure in there and bury it underground, and it ferments. So you don't just get manure; you get a fermented calcium-enriched manure, which is super strong. And presumably that was discovered accidentally. But hey, it got handed down. How do you make a super rich fertilizer when you haven't got the agrochemical industry behind you? So it's those sort of things. Using nettles, stinging nettles. If you let them rot over the winter, it's all about things like fermentation. We know that things that ferment become stronger. We know that from silage making. We know that if you agitate a solution, think of a barman. The whole point of shaking a cocktail is because it brings out more of the flavors. Well, it's the same with some of the biodynamic preparations. They shake them, to get them to be more efficacious. So it's just that's why I say it. So it's a bit like folklores, old wives' tales. But to our forefathers, they weren't old wives' tales. They were pragmatic ways of making and protecting your vineyard, your farm, and making your crops grow better. One of the other aspects is of course the lunar cycles, which a lot of Steiner stuff is about the interaction of the sun and the moon, and of course again to critics that you think, well, that's just barking mad, that's just crazy, but then it's not that crazy if you think about the tides. If you're a mariner, if you're a sailor, we can predict spring tides and we can predict neap tides. We can predict low tides and high tides because we know what the moon's doing in relation to the sun, and that's how we get tides. So that sort of lunatic powers. We know all about those, and it's like it's okay for predicting tides, and yet sort of agriculturally, how does that come into effect? Well, I knew even before. Understanding my experience with biodynamics in wine, that if you prune roses when the moon is descending, when the moon is waning, sap doesn't seep from pruning. If you prune when the moon is rising, sap rises, and this is something to do again with the strength of the lunar and the sun and the moon. The same concept as the tides. But I knew that beforehand. You prune when the moon is waning, and then you don't lose sap, you don't get infections, and you don't get the twigs going brown when you prune. That's one of those old wife tales that had its origins in this idea of the lunar cycle. We know that people, lunatics, they go nuts, once a month, the full moons. I mean, there's lots of things that our forefathers knew. I'm no new age sort of weirdo. I may be a weirdo, but I'm not new age. These are just pragmatic things, which I think, we've lost. And people that live on the land and for whom the land is everything, they knew that. And I think our modern we think they're so clever with all our modern stuff. That's not always the case. If you're a biodynamic wine grower, it doesn't mean you make great wine, because you've got to be a great winemaker to make great wine. It doesn't mean it doesn't turn a crap terroir into a good terroir. You've got to have a good terroir, and a good winemaker to make great wine. But if you do have a great terroir and you are a great winemaker and you follow biodynamics, well, the chances are you're going to produce the best of the best. And, again, I've experienced that in my wine world. When I used to go and visit some of the great white winemakers like Anne-Claude Leflèvre at Domaine Leflèvre in Pouligny-Montrachet. And that's where I first came across the direct effect of biodynamics, because there I was with the regisseur tasting wine, as we did every year, and we got to one of the great cuvées, the Grand Cuvée of Bâtard Montrachet. And I remember writing my notes and saying, well, that was fantastic, that was really very, very good. But in the corner of my eye, I saw another tank, and it was also Bâtard Montrachet, but this sample didn't come from that tank. So I said, what's in that tank? Tell me about that one. And the guy sort of shifted, very embarrassed, from foot to foot. He sort of went bright red and, was clearly, not at all happy about the fact that I'd spotted it. And eventually he went over and he brought out a sample of that. And it was Bâtard Montrachet as well. It was the same wine, same vineyard. And I tasted that, and wow. And he said, well, which do you prefer? Which of the two versions do you prefer? And I said, well, I prefer this one. They're both outrageous. They are both amazing. They are both the top of their game. But this one just has a little bit more. And he said, well, yeah, that's because we made that one following biodynamics. And that's when it sort of really, really brought it home to me that that's the difference that biodynamics can make. It's the quality of the fruit, assuming the winemaking, assuming that the terroir are both great. The difference is that fruit, the grapes, are just at the very, very best you can get. And that's what really brought it home to me. And so I'd always wanted to do it with barley to see if the effect would happen. And so I tried it once at Bruichladdich. We did it once there, and that was great fun. But that wasn't it wasn't a Scottish barley. We had to get it from England. But here in Ireland, I had the chance to actually persuade 3 of our farmers to were they up for converting to biodynamics, and that was in 2016.
I'm curious, Mark, given that my experience with the Irish is that they are notably quite a skeptical lot.
Yeah.
How did you persuade 3 farmers with, let me sort of put it this way. Okay, here's one of the things you got to do. You got to take these cow horns, fill them up with cow crap, and then bury them around the field as fertilizer. Now, if I'm hearing that for the first time, there's a phrase that I'm thinking of that is very along those lines.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, there was. I can remember the meeting very well, very vividly, and there certainly was an element of you must be mad. But there were, and this is the point. There were 3 of the guys, at least at the time, at least 2, who were actually intrigued. And they obviously already knew about biodynamics. They were obviously sort of thinking about it. They were obviously contemplating, this idea as an agriculturalist that there must be a better way of doing this. And so they were already halfway there. I mean, both of them were actually already doing organic production anyhow. So it's a step up from that. Are you prepared to go the whole hog? That's the point. Philosophically, are you going to go the whole way? Put all your eggs in one basket. And these guys did. And I took them to Alsace and I showed them, because that's really the home of biodynamics. And that's where we had some very good hands-on meetings, with Olivier Humbrecht, Zint Humbrecht, and his regisseur there, Alexander Guth, who spent a riveting day with this guy explaining the whole thing to you, in a practical way, showing you these composts. I mean, composts, to me, are smelly, dirty things. Biodynamic compost, you could almost eat the bloody stuff. It's perfume. It's beautiful. And I think that was the final inspiration they needed to take up the challenge and go the whole way. So my Le Fleuve moment, the moment where does it work or doesn't it, was when the barley arrived, and we compared 2 barleys, one from one of our single farms, and one traditional farming, and one done under the biodynamic. And to look at them, to be honest, they looked pretty similar, visually. One was slightly darker than the other. The biodynamic was slightly darker, same variety. But it's when you smelt the stuff, you just think, my word, there was no doubting the difference. One is nice and malty and mealy, and you go, yeah, that's good, nice, that's nice fun. But the other was like just aromatically perfumed, was sweet, nutty, it was just, you wanted to eat it. And that's what my memory was like, in Le Fleuve's cellar. There was this difference. Both were very good, but one just has something else. It was just like turbocharged. So, of course, what then happens once you distill it? Well, the first spirit that I tried, straight off the still after initial middle cut, so it's not normally the best, most representative sample, but again, you have a spirit that's clearly Waterford spirit, clearly our typicity of spirit, but it just had an extra dimension. It had more oiliness, it had more middle, It had more density, more intensity. It was just more focused. That you couldn't mistake it. It was clearly not from normally grown barley. Now, is it any better? Of course, is the $6 million question. Well, that remains to be seen. We distilled it the same way. We didn't change anything. It was malted the same way. So, as new spirit, yes, you'd say it's more focused, more intense. As a mature spirit, well, we'll have to wait and see. But I would definitely suggest that from what I've seen so far, that this spirit will produce an exceptional version of Waterford whiskey. So the answer is, why don't we do it all biodynamically? And I think that's something that, crumbs, if it was physically possible, you would. But it's not, because these are the only 3 farmers to grow biodynamic malting barley in Ireland. The only 3 that do it. They only did it because I asked them to. And of course, it's expensive stuff. But if more people were going to grow biodynamically, then I'd buy more if I could. If they grow it, I'll distill it.
Was there a difference in the yields? Did you get more alcohol out of the biodynamic barley? Was there any change?
No, the yield was more or less the same as about 400 litres of alcohol per tonne. Off the field, they get less, clearly, but not that much less. And of course, the balance is that if you do get less, then you pay a bit more for it. Which is what we do with organic barley anyhow. But it's one of those things where the excitement of experiencing this, there is something rather special, that this is barley that's been produced in the most basic way possible, and yet it has this aroma and intensity which you just don't get normally. So what I would say to all the cynics and all the critics, out there, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will say it's absolutely barking mad. I suppose it is a bit barking mad, but you've got to taste the difference, man.
If you think about it, though, this is taking the farming of barley back 300 years to the way the original distillers in Scotland and Ireland were doing it. We don't know if they were burying the cow horns and stuff like that, but this is how it was being grown back then.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you go back, I've always maintained that with organic farming. These guys, back in the Victorian era, didn't have much in the way of agrochemical industry to fall back on. They were. It was very much based around the farm. So yeah, if you go back to the 18th century and before, everything by default was organic. And taking a step further, there would have been people that still knew how to do these things, how to use, how to turbocharge their composts. It was before you have heavy tractors. I mean, I love tractors. I'm a farmer myself, as you know, but I love tractors. But when you see the size of these tractors, they get bigger and bigger as the machinery gets bigger and bigger. I've got this problem on Islay, where all the field drains that were put down in the 19th century have been broken, because the tractors being used now to plow and to weed kill and stuff, they're all so big, all so heavy, that they've just broken all those clay drains, and so the whole bloody fields, they're all a quagmire now, and that's as a direct result of having machinery that's just wasn't around in the old days. And, which has had a detrimental effect on the landscape as a result. So a lot of it makes sense. In the vineyards of France, they use horses quite often now to plough in between the rows of vines, because the horses just don't wear the soil away. They don't sort of compact it, so that when it rains, it doesn't all get washed away. The horses they're not just done because it looks nice. It's done because it actually stops the soil being washed away. So there's a lot of practical reasons that our guys knew what they were doing. They've been doing it, as I say, for 15,000 years. They knew how to farm. I suppose you could compare it to sailing. Up until the First World War, or even the Second World War, you had these. That was the pinnacle of sailing knowledge at the time, where you had these four-masted barks carrying grain from Australia back to the UK. The Great Grain Race, as it was called. Eric Newby wrote a fantastic book about it, The Last Great Grain Race. And that was the pinnacle of sailing knowledge, that they'd taken it to the zenith. There was nowhere else to go. And that's when steam engines came in, and steamboats, and sailing sort of just basically stagnated, until, I suppose, you now get, those Admiral's Cup, what do you call them, the AC 72s that were racing there in Newport, catamarans, with foiling, catamarans. That was the first, great sort of advance in sort of 100 years of sailing knowledge. So I think we go through these evolutions. And agriculture is sort of going through one at the moment, I guess.
Let's get back to the distillery now. You're doing back to organic barley this week after doing the biodynamic stuff last week.
Yeah.
When do you think you're going to actually start bottling stuff? Because you'll hit 3 years in December for First Spirit at mature whiskey, but I know you're not going to do it right away, right?
No. I mean, that was never the intention. Remember, we're doing single malt only. We know, that sort of, if you distill well and you use really good ingredients, that you can produce a spirit, and you use really good wood, and you use it wisely and sagely, that you can make a spirit that is much more advanced than we are used to, from industrial distilling. So we showed that, we demonstrated that at Bruichladdich. I think every distillery has an optimum age, assuming all things being equal. But it's certainly not these very old bottlings that we remember from the 60s and 70s. What I call the age of innocence. When distilling was a lot slower, the barrel qualities were much better. I think a lot of that's been lost in sort of industrialization. So in my own version of sort of biodynamics, going back in time, when things perhaps weren't that bad after all, it is slowing things down, using better ingredients, terroir being a fundamental point, getting these differences from different fields. That would have happened, in the 19th century, clandestine distilling. The barley would have come from around the locality, around the distillery. There would have been fields that ripened earlier and would have been distilled separately. There would have been fields that ripened later and would have been traditionally distilled at the end. All of that sort of has been lost. And what I'm doing at Waterford is sort of bringing it back. That we can do these different fields at different times. When we harvest in August, there's about a 3-week window. We've got 5,000 tons of barley winging its way along little country lanes. Tractors and trailers. It's a logistical exercise like D-Day. It's an amazing logistics to get all those farm units separate, dried, stored. It's a huge endeavor. And so obviously having gone to those lengths, we then want to distill them well and evenly and correctly which is what our mash filter lets us do, extract that terroir flavour, and then keep them in good wood. So if you use good wood, and we spend about 30% of our cost of production is in wood alone. That's probably 3 times more than most people, because I don't believe there's any shortcut to maturing whiskey. Everybody's trying, they're trying sort of playing music, ultrasound, additives galore, this, that, and the other. But I don't think there is any real shortcut to maturing whiskey properly, other than using very good quality wood, and that's expensive. And then you need to understand how to use it. And so I think my time at Bruichladdich was very effective in seeing what works and how to do this. And so that's what I'm now applying here. At Bruichladdich, when we started, we didn't have the money to buy good wood, and that's why we did lots of finishing or acing, as we prefer to call it. Here at Waterford, we started right from day one, with 40 different farms and the best barrels you can possibly buy. The proof of that is that, it's going to be whiskey in January. So that's 10 months, 11 months, 9 months away. But that doesn't mean we need to release it then. And we won't. We won't release it at 4. We won't release it at 5. We might release a little bit, a few sort of testers for you to see, to compare and contrast at 5. But really, we're not thinking of releasing anything until about 6 years of age. And I think that will be about the right time. And so our whole project has been financed accordingly, on the assumption that we won't have any revenue until that time. So we're in that phase of laying down those stocks, laying down those variables, an unprecedented set of variables that will give us the most amazing choice to play with when it comes to putting together the definitive Waterford whiskey.
If you're a rum lover, be warned. Mark Reynier is coming for you, too. He and his partners are working on a distillery deal in Grenada with plans to start selling Renegade rum in the very near future. That's this week's WhiskyCast In Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic 16-year-old Lagavulin, the Distillers Edition, and the new 8-year-old Lagavulin at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, and since it's St. Patrick's Day weekend, let's focus on a few Irish whiskies, starting with the new Lambay releases we talked about earlier. The Lambay Small Batch is a blended Irish whiskey that's bottled at 40% ABV, but is not chill filtered, and it's finished in Camus Cognac casks. The nose has notes of honey, dried flowers, straw, vanilla, and a slight nuttiness. The taste has a good balance of flavors with cracked peppercorns, honey, peaches, red apples, and butterscotch, while the finish is nice and long with lingering spices. I'm scoring the Lambay Small Batch a 91. Now, the Lambay Single Malt is also finished in cognac casks, but those casks do spend some time on Lambay Island. It's also bottled at 40% ABV with no chill filtering, and the nose is malty with notes of allspice, honey, straw, and butterscotch. The taste is nice and spicy with allspice, clove, and hints of cracked peppercorns, balanced by honey and butterscotch notes, and the finish is very long with nice spices that last and last, complemented by a good underlying sweetness. I'm scoring the Lambay Single Malt a 92, and these are both great examples of what skipping the chill filtering can do to a whiskey. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, who is proud to announce the release of a new series of Old Fitzgerald bottled in bond bourbons. Bottled in an ornate decanter inspired by a 1950s original, it carries on the legacy of John E. Fitzgerald and his act of larceny. Learn more at heavenhilldistillery.com/blog. And think wisely, drink wisely. I've mentioned Louise McGuane's Chapelgate Whiskey Company in County Clare and her dream of reviving the bonded whiskey tradition in Ireland. I received a bottle the other day of Chapelgate's debut release, the J.J. Corey The Gale, named for one of Ireland's legendary whiskey modders. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has a nice maltiness with honeycomb, linseed oil, dried flowers, and muted spices. Those spices come alive on the palate, though, with nice clove and black pepper notes along with white peaches and touches of lemon-lime citrus that come out as the spices start to fade. There's also a slight flintiness in the background that carries into the finish with lingering spices and citrusy tartness. If you drink this one neat, it's not going to win any points for smoothness. But if you want a modern interpretation of the rough-and-tumble Irish whiskies of the past, this is it. I'm scoring the J.J. Corey The Gale a 92. Now we've looked at Irish blends and a single malt, but there is nothing quite like a single pot still Irish whiskey. They're made from a combination of malted and unmalted barley and triple distilled. Of course, the single refers to a single distillery. And this week, I have an embarrassment of riches in front of me. Irish Distillers recently released the second edition in the Middleton Dair Gaelach series. The Bluebell Forest edition uses casks made from 6 Irish oak trees felled in the Bluebell Forest near Dublin, with the wood from each tree kept separated as it was coopered. When the inaugural Grinnell's Wood edition of Dair Gaelach was released in 2015, each tree's whiskies were destined for a single part of the world. This time around, all 6 Bluebell Forest whiskies will be available in very limited amounts worldwide, and I have samples of all 6 on my desk. Obviously, we don't have enough time to go through the tasting notes for all of them here, but I will have them up soon at whiskycast.com, along with a head-to-head comparison. And since March is the 3rd month of the year, let's look at tree number 3. As with 4 of the 6 bottlings, this one is bottled at 56.2% ABV. The nose has notes of freshly cut oak sawdust, honey, caramel, and butterscotch candies, and soft spices. The taste starts off dry and oaky, then comes alive with classic pot still spices of clove, black pepper, cardamom, and allspice, while honey, vanilla, straw, and a touch of chocolate add complexity. The finish is long. It sits on your tongue so long that you're going to think about charging it rent. And there's one word to describe the whiskey. Wow. I'm scoring the Middleton Dair Gaelach Bluebell Forest Tree number 3 a 95, and the others are equally magnificent. Once again, the What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, and I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,100 whiskeys from around the world at whiskycast.com. Of course, that's also where you'll find links for the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD videos, along with the latest whiskey news, events, and a whole lot more, including our list of great whiskey bars around the world and a complete archive of past episodes. If you like the show, and since you've listened this long, I'm guessing you do, please take a moment and leave a review or rating for us wherever you download your podcasts from. That will help other whiskey lovers discover WhiskyCast when they're looking for podcasts. Our cask strength conversation goes on throughout the week online. You'll find WhiskyCast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. And I'd love to hear from you. My email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
You don't need a special occasion to celebrate with something truly unique. But a personally engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label can make any occasion special. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnnywalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.